Hi guys, so today we're going to start on our last unit of the course. As you can see from the title up here, our last unit is on math of investment. So basically looking at when you invest money, how your money can grow, and also when you borrow money or you take on debt, how that debt can grow as well. Okay, so looking at our first lesson is going to be on this concept called simple interest. Okay, so let's start off with, first off, what is interest? So interest is the fee paid on money that is borrowed. Fee is a percentage of what was borrowed. So that's why anytime you hear or you will hear about interest, generally speaking, in the news or on commercials from a bank or whatever, they'll express the interest rate as a percentage. So that's why we have this line here, fee is a percentage of what was borrowed. Okay. And it's not always on borrowed money. You also get interest on money that you invest. Okay, so either you can be the one borrowing the money or you can be the one lending the money. Okay, so that being said, what are some situations where you would pay interest? So here, if you are the person borrowing the money or taking on the debt, you'd be paying the interest. So some examples you can see here: credit card, a car loan, a bank loan, a mortgage. Right, so anywhere you're taking or borrowing money, you're gonna end up paying interest. On the flip side, what are some situations where you'd get paid interest if you have a savings account, right? So based on however much money you have in your savings account and whatever the interest rate is, your bank will pay you interest every month. It's usually not much these days, but you do get paid, something for having your money in the bank. Another one is RRSP, and that stands for Registered Retirement Savings Plan. And that's basically what people invest in or put money into when they're younger, so that they can have savings or hopefully enough savings for when they retire. Another one some of you guys may have, or your parents may have for you, I should say, is an RESP, and that stands for Registered Educational Savings Plan. And same idea as RRSP. RRSP is for saving for retirement. RESP is saving for your post-secondary education. So people start RESP sometimes when their child is born, or maybe when they're a few years old, or whenever they really want to. Before, obviously, they go to post-secondary, and they put money in regularly, like every month, for example, and then that money grows, and the goal is to have, if not all of the money needed, for a university or college education, at least a good chunk that can help pay for your tuition and whatever else that you need at the time. Okay, there are two main ways of charging or collecting interest. So there's simple interest and there's compound interest. What is the difference? Simple interest, you only pay interest on the original amount you borrowed. Compound interest, so the difference is you pay interest on the original amount, which is the same as simple interest, but with compound, you also pay interest on any interest that has accumulated. Okay, so let me say that again. Simple interest, you pay interest only on the original amount you borrowed. Compound interest, you pay interest on the original amount plus any interest that is accrued on top of the original amount. So here is a quick example underneath to illustrate those concepts of simple interest and compound interest. So case one is simple interest. Case two is compound interest. So the example says you borrow $1,000 at 25% interest per year. How much will you owe after 3 years? Okay, so with the simple interest, as it says in our definition, it says you only pay interest on the original amount you borrowed. So you borrow $1,000 here at year zero, at the start. After 1 year, you have to pay 25% interest on the amount that you borrowed. So 25% of 1,000 is $250. So how much do you owe now? You owe the original $1,000 you borrowed plus this $250 in interest. So you owe a total of $1,250. Okay, after year one. Year two, how much interest do you pay? Well, you're still paying 25%, and because simple interest, you pay only on the original amount that you borrowed. So the original amount we borrowed was 1,000. 25% of 1,000 is again $250. So how much do you owe now? 1,000 that you originally borrowed, $250 in the first year's interest, $250 in the second year's interest, for a total of $1,500. And then year three, same thing. You pay 25% interest on the $1,000 that you borrowed. 25% of 1,000 is $250. So now you owe a total of $1,750 after 3 years. Okay, how does compound interest differ? Okay, so year 1, it looks exactly the same, right? You borrowed $1,000 here, year 0, and year 1, you pay 25% on that 1,000, you pay $250 in interest, and you owe a total of the original 1,000 plus the $250 in interest, which is $1,250. So far we're the exact same as simple interest. Now, where does it differ? You'll see that in year 2. In year 2, with simple interest, we still pay 25% of 1,000, which you see here is $250. In year 2, in compound interest, you have to pay 25% on the original 1,000 that you borrowed and this $250 of interest from year 1. So you're actually now paying 25% interest on $1,250. So that $1,250 includes the original 1,000 plus the $250 you borrowed, plus the $250 in interest from year 1. So your interest from year 2 here, $1,250 times 0.25, which is 25%, is $312.50. So now you can see your total amount owing is the $1,250 plus $312.50, which is $1,562.50. And then the same thing happens in year 3. You pay the interest on the original amount you borrowed, plus the interest from year 1, plus the interest from year 2. So 1,000 plus $250 plus $312.50, which is the amount owing here, $1,562.50. You pay 25% on that amount. So 25% of $1,562.50 is $390.62. So you can see after 3 years with compound interest, you owe $19.53.12, whereas after 3 years of simple interest, you'd only owe $17.50. So if you are the one borrowing money and you're paying the interest, you definitely would prefer simple interest. If you were the one lending the money, meaning you were getting paid the interest, then you would prefer compounded interest. Okay. Just one other term here. In finance, we call the original amount borrowed or invested. So whatever the original amount is, in this case, 1,000, we call it the principal. And I do see a spelling mistake here. It's principal, so it should be P-R-I-N-C-I-P-A-L. Okay, so whether you're borrowing it or you're lending it, whatever the original amount is, that is referred to as the principal. Okay. What is the formula for simple interest? So you can see the formula right here. So to solve for interest is equal to the principal. So the amount that you're starting with, whether you're borrowing it or lending it, times whatever the interest rate is, multiplied by the time. How long is how long are you borrowing it for, or how long are you lending it for? Okay, so what do these variables stand for here? So the short form of this formula is I equals PRT. So P times R times T. The P stands for the principal. R is the interest rate, and always be careful the interest rate will be given to you as a percentage. You want to always convert that to a decimal. So take whatever percentage is given to you and divide it by 100. So if the interest was 6%, to get that as a decimal, we would divide 6 by 100, which would give us 0.06. And T is the time, and this part is very important, in years since the money was borrowed or invested. So if you are told the time in months, you need to convert that to years. If you're told the time in days, you need to convert that to years. Okay, so if they say 24 months, we would convert that to 2 years, for example. Okay, the total amount of the investment, or the total amount owed, is whatever you started with, the principal, plus however much interest has accrued over the time period in question. So P plus I. So this I is basically this P times R times T, and that represents the interest. If you look below here, after subbing in expression for I from above, so if we take the PRT and plug that in for I, what do we get? We get amount equals the principal plus principal times the interest rate times the amount of length of time of the investment. Okay, so here's your formula for amount, or if you're given the interest, you can use this amount. If you have to solve for the interest, you can use this formula for the amount. What we have down here is basically if we had to isolate for something other than the amount, it's showing us how we could isolate for P over here. So to isolate for P, we divide both sides by RT. To isolate for R, we divide both sides by PT. To isolate for T, we divide both sides by PR. Okay, you don't have to do this. You could plug in your numbers first and then isolate. That's fine as well for whichever variable you're solving for. Or you can isolate right at the start, like we did here. So if you're solving for principal, for example, you could start with this formula and then plug in your I and your RT and solve. Or what I'm saying is if you're solving for principal, you could leave it like in this form, sub in your, sub in your numbers, and then isolate after for your variable. Okay, so either way, whatever you prefer is fine, right? So either sub in your numbers right away and then isolate for wherever the variable is, or isolate the variable you're solving for first, and then plug in your numbers. Okay, so if you go to the blank file or the blank note, you'll see this practice sheet on there. So for some practice for you there. If you have any questions, then as always, feel free to email me and I will get back to you as soon as possible. And I just realized when I was talking about these three formulas down here where we're isolating, we're not using A equals P plus R, P plus P times R times T. This is actually the interest formula, all right? So just to be clear, if we look up here, I equals P times R times T, that's what we're using over here. I equals P times R times T. So then to isolate for each variable, you can see how it's done for P, how to isolate for R, how to isolate for T. Okay, so there's our first lesson on simple interest.